All right, sorry for that slow start. This is Miss Weiss, and I wanted to go through a short PowerPoint with you over paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing. These are three very important parts of writing a research paper, and I want to make sure that you're comfortable with understanding what they are and how to do those three things. So, paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing information is an important part of writing research papers and explanatory essays. First, I want to say in the state of Texas, for STAR test, for EOC testing, you do often have to pull, or you're asked to pull a quote and use text information from the text to support your points. That's a really good start. It's a good practice to be able to do that. Research writing is that on steroids. So you're not really giving just your opinion. You're not just writing a narrative about your life or talking about things just from your own perspective. What research writing is taking a topic, and usually you're trying to prove a point. It's a point that is an opinion, it's not a fact, because there's usually at least two sides to it. And what you do is you go out and you gather information from credible sources and you use that information to back up your point, to prove your point. So basically, you're saying, here is something true, and here's the reason why it's true, because all of these people back this up. They provide evidence to support what I'm saying. So, paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing, those are three important parts of research writing. But what's the difference between those three? Well, paraphrasing, you take a passage from um, a book or an article or whatever the source is, and you put it into your own words. It's about the same length as the original, but it's not a direct quote. And if you paraphrase something, if you put it into your own words and then you put that into your paper, you have to give credit to the source, the original author. You can't just take credit for it. So that is something that's very important in research writing, is to always give credit to the source so that you're not plagiarizing. Because plagiarizing, as we know, is stealing, and you will, number one, not receive a passing grade if you plagiarize someone else's work, but it also can get you into legal trouble if you're in a position where you're plagiarizing and you're out in the, I'll say, out in the real world. So when do you paraphrase? And remember, paraphrasing is putting it into your own words, but it's very detailed. You should paraphrase a source when you need a lot. You need to use a lot of their information, but you don't want that big chunk of your paper to be a direct quote, because really only about 15% of your paper should be quotes. You don't want a whole paper full of quotes. You need to also incorporate paraphrases and summarizing the information. So, quoting, you probably know this, but when you quote something, you are saying word for word what the original writer said. And you have to put quotation marks around it. So, within your paper, if you just need a short part of what you read from the original or from an expert, then you would pull that exact quote and in put it into your paper with quotation marks around it. And again, you have to give credit to that source. You can't just put the quote in there and not tell where you got it. So when do you quote? You should add quotes to your paper when usually it's going to be a shorter. It's not going to be quite as long as something you would want to paraphrase or summarize. And you want to make sure that if it's a specific statement that really is powerful for your argument, then you quote it. If it's going to add more weight to your argument, quote it directly. They should always be relevant to your main point. I said this earlier, but your all of your information, all of your quotes, your paraphrases, your summaries, they should always support your thesis statement. Don't get off on a tangent and start talking about something that has nothing to do with your thesis, because your thesis, remember, is the topic of your paper. It's the roadmap for your whole research paper. So the last of the three is summarizing. And when you summarize, it's kind of like paraphrasing. You also do put it in your own words, but a summary is going to be shorter than the paraphrase. It's going to be just real concise, a concise summary, but you still have to give credit where credit is due. So just because you're summarizing something, if you got it from another source, unless it's common knowledge, if it's common knowledge, then you don't have to give credit. But if you went and you found it somewhere and then you summarize it, you still have to give credit to the author. So when do you summarize? Well, you should summarize information when your audience needs to know the main ideas but not all of the details. So just kind of sum it up for them, because sometimes the details really don't help your argument. They just bog down the paper. So you just want to put it in a nice, neat package, put it in your paper, and then give credit where you found the information. So why do we do those things? Why do we paraphrase? Why do we quote? Why do we summarize? Well, here's some good points that it's important for you to understand why. Those things enhance our writing. They develop credibility because we're not experts in the field. So when we go and we get information from the experts, that gives weight to our argument. Those paraphrases, quotes, and summaries, they also add depth to our writing. They provide relevant and supporting evidence. And we've already said, but we do those things to avoid plagiarism, because we paraphrase or we summarize or whatever, and we say in the proper format that we got it from a source, and we name that source. So we're going to do a quick little practice. Read below the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. It says in groups, but obviously we can't do in groups because we're online. So we're going to do this together just as an exercise. So the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So, how do you include a summary, quote, or paraphrase in your writing? Well, it's easy as ICE. ICE stands for I, introduce the idea, C, cite the source, and E, explain its relevance. So you introduce, cite, and explain. So when we do quotes, well, you know what, I'm sorry. We read the preamble and we were supposed to summarize it. So basically, remember, a summary is much shorter. It's going to be it's not all the details, but a short version in your own words. So the people of the United States, in order to have in order to take care of everyone and everyone's rights, came up with the Constitution for the United States of America. So you don't have to list everything in the middle, all of the reasons. You just kind of have to give the big ball of wax. They did it to take care of the people and to protect the people. And in order to do that, they wrote a constitution. So that's kind of how you would do the summary. All right, so formatting quotes. Quotes cannot stand alone. You would never just stick a quote in your paper and let it be its own sentence. You have to kind of introduce it and lead into it. So you have usually a transition, and an indicator, a verb, a quote, and a citation. So, for example, for instance, to illustrate, moreover, furthermore, those are different ways that you could start your sentence. So like, let's look at this first row here. So you have, for example, Steinbeck writes blah, 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 and then at the end you put the page number where it comes from. Or for instance, in the novel, Ralph explains, if you were talking about Lord of the Flies, and then after that you would put the author's name and the page number. It says down here in the note, if you state the author's name as the indicator, you only need to cite the page number. So in your sentence, if you say William Golding, for example, you wouldn't need to put his name again in your citation. You would just put the page number. Okay, can you label each part of the quote below between transition, indicator, verb, quote, and citation? Okay, so let's read this. The novel of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck begins in the picturesque Salinas Valley in central California. To illustrate, Steinbeck describes a river that is lined with trees, willows, fresh and green with every spring. Page 3. Okay, so we're looking for a transition. So a transition word, remember the transitions were like, for example, for instance, to illustrate, moreover, furthermore. So do you see that? What about right here? To illustrate. Oh, yeah, there it is. The transition is to illustrate. The indicator, now what was the indicator? Let's look. An indicator is author name, character name, subject name. So to illustrate, Steinbeck, and then our verb, what does he do? He describes a river, and then the quote, here it is. This quote is directly from the book. And then let's catch up with where we are. Transition, indicator, verb, quote, and then lastly, the citation. This tells us the page number. So this quote is from page 3 in Of Mice and Men. Now, if we did not say Steinbeck, if we said to illustrate, the author describes a river, if we didn't name him, then here in our citation we would actually put Steinbeck 3. We would put the author's name and the page number. But since we already said who the author was, we only need to put the page number in this example. Okay, to add variety to your writing, you need to mix it up. You need to not just quote, not just summarize or paraphrase, but you need to do all of them. Try to do all of those things when you're doing research writing. It will make your writing more, have more depth and be more, you make a better grade, you'll be a better writer, you'll have more weight for your arguments. Okay, so here's a quick quiz. When you paraphrase, you should be sure to, which two of these? A, write the text in your own words. B, place quotation marks around the text. Or C, properly cite the source. Well, the only time you place quotation marks is if you're quoting. If you're paraphrasing, remember you're putting it on in your own words, so you don't put the quotation marks. So, yep, those two are correct. True or false? A summary should be the same length as the original text. Now, what did we say about that? What do you think? False. A summary is a shortened and condensed version, whereas when you paraphrase something, it will be about the same length as the original text. When should you use a direct quote? A, when you need to provide a lot of details to your audience, or B, when you need to include specific or technical information in your text. What do you think? B, if you need a lot of details, you're better to paraphrase. But if you want specific or technical details, it's best to add a quote. And what do you need to consider when adding in a direct quote? A, how the quotation fits in grammatically with the rest of your text, or B, if the original author is still alive. Well, when we do research, most of the time, we're not too worried if the original author is alive. We're more worried if they're credible, if they're reliable. So I'm going to say A. When you include a quotation into your own paper, it needs to be grammatically aligned with the rest of your paper. So you want your paper to flow. So you do have to think about those things. That's the end of this PowerPoint. I hope it gave you some information that is helpful to you, and stay tuned for the next bit of information.